My son invited everyone to Thanksgiving except me. Then realized who owns the restaurant. That sentence alone might sound like the start of some bitter joke, but it isn't. It is my truth. It is the ache that set into my chest on a cold November morning when I realized that the child I raised, the boy whose scraped knees I bandaged and whose graduation cap I proudly straightened. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Had decided that I, his father, no longer belonged at his table. I am a man in my late 60s, a widower, a father who did his best even in the shadow of grief, even when the weight of the world pressed harder after my wife passed. For decades, Thanksgiving was the one day where family meant something solid, something sacred. My wife would rise at dawn to roast the turkey, her laughter filling the kitchen, and I would sneak tastes of her stuffing while she playfully swatted my hand away. We hosted, we cooked, we built a tradition together. When she died, those traditions fell to me and my son, Ethan. Or so I thought. This year, I didn't receive a call. I didn't receive a card. I didn't even get a lazy text message saying, "Hey Dad, see you Thursday." Nothing. Silence, as if I were a stranger. But strangers don't feel betrayal like this. Only blood can cut this deep. I found out about the dinner by accident. I was walking downtown, the crisp air biting at my skin, the shop windows glowing with seasonal displays, when I overheard a pair of Ethan's friends chatting near the cafe. They spoke casually, like everyone knew, about the Thanksgiving dinner Ethan was hosting. They mentioned the venue, the long guest list, the musicians, the catered sides. They spoke of it as a grand affair, something out of a magazine. My heart tightened with every word, each syllable hammering home the truth. My son had planned something extravagant, something communal, something joyous, and I was not part of it. The words sat in my chest like stones. He had invited everyone, friends, co-workers, extended family, neighbors, but not me, his father. The man who raised him alone after his mother's death. The man who worked double shifts to send him to college. The man who sat in hospital waiting rooms, praying feverishly when Ethan's appendix burst in his teenage years. That man had been cut out. Why? The question twisted in my mind until it became a storm. Had I failed him in ways I never realized? Had my sternness, my insistence on responsibility turned to resentment in his heart? Did he blame me for his mother's absence, though I carried that loss just as heavily as he did? That night, I sat alone in my quiet house, the walls echoing with ghosts of laughter long gone. I set a single plate at the table, poured a glass of wine, and tried to imagine the feast Ethan was preparing for others. My stomach turned at the thought, not from hunger, but from humiliation. But here is the thing about age. It can weaken your body, yes, but it sharpens certain truths. I knew deep in my bones that I would not let this exclusion be the end of my story. My son might have forgotten who I was, but he also seemed to have forgotten something else, something far more practical and far more consequential. He had chosen a restaurant for his grand Thanksgiving feast, my restaurant, and in that instant, as the bitterness gave way to clarity, I realized that Thanksgiving would not play out the way Ethan imagined. Not this year. This was no longer just about turkey and pie. This was about dignity, about memory, about reminding a son that his father was not so easily erased. So I waited, patiently, quietly, for the moment when the doors of my restaurant would open and Ethan's perfect Thanksgiving would begin without him knowing who held the power to end it or to reclaim it. Because in the end, family may forget you, but ownership legacy, and truth, they cannot be ignored. And that is where my story begins. The sting of exclusion cut deeper than any physical wound I had ever known, and as I sat in the quiet of my own home on that cold November afternoon, my heart felt like it was being torn in two. My son, my only child, the boy I had raised after my wife passed far too early, was hosting a grand Thanksgiving dinner. I had seen the photos shared online, the invitations whispered about by extended family, the decorations, the expensive dishes ordered, and even the lavish spread that was being prepared in a restaurant setting, yet my name had not been on the list, my presence not desired. I thought back to the years when Thanksgiving had meant something far different, when my late wife would rise before dawn to prepare the turkey, humming softly in the kitchen, while the aroma of butter and herbs filled our home. I would always carve the bird at the head of the table, my son at my right hand, my wife at my left, and together we would bow our heads and give thanks for family, for love, for togetherness. The image of her smile as candlelight flickered in her eyes returned to me so vividly that it felt as if she had just left the room. Now, that same table sat covered in dust, empty, the chairs around it silent as gravestones. To be cast aside by my own blood on a holiday meant to celebrate unity and gratitude was not only painful, it was humiliating. The memories flooded back in waves, teaching my son how to say grace for the first time when he was a boy, showing him how to mash the potatoes with his small hands, letting him lick the spoon when the pumpkin pie filling was ready. All those tiny moments of fatherhood that I treasured more than anything else. Every sacrifice I had made, every overtime shift, every late night of exhaustion had been for him. I worked to provide, to ensure he could grow up with opportunities I never had. I endured loneliness after my wife's death, all because I believed that keeping traditions alive for my son was worth the pain. And now, after all of that, he had chosen to erase me from the very table where my presence had once been the anchor. I stared at the old family photos still hanging on the wall, the frames slightly crooked with age. There we were, year after year, smiling, holding hands, leaning into one another as though nothing could break us. I remembered my wife's gentle voice, promising me that our son would always know love, always be cared for. Had I failed her? Had I failed myself? The house felt colder with every memory that rose up. It was not simply about the dinner, not about turkey or stuffing or cranberry sauce. It was about what it meant my son had deemed me unnecessary, irrelevant, a burden to his celebration. In that moment, I felt as though I had lost my family all over again, as though my wife's absence was being compounded by the betrayal of my own flesh and blood. Yet, beneath the grief, a slow, simmering anger began to form. It was not loud or explosive, but steady, like embers waiting for the right breath of air to ignite. I knew then that this Thanksgiving would not pass unnoticed. My son may have believed he could erase me from the picture, but he had forgotten one thing while he had taken over the tradition. I still held the foundation beneath it all. And in that bitter, lonely moment, I silently vowed that the story was far from over. All my life, I had been a man of work, a man who believed that effort, patience, and sacrifice were the only paths to honor. I came from little, and built what I could with my hands and my persistence. I never asked for more than what was necessary. When I was young, I worked double shifts in warehouses, on construction sites, wherever the work was honest and steady. My wife used to tell me that I carried the weight of two men on my shoulders, and perhaps she was right, because everything I did to build a life not for myself, but for my family. I was not a man of luxuries, never one to chase trends or squander what I earned. My home was modest, my clothes practical, my pleasures simple. A good meal, a warm fire, a roof that didn't leak, those were riches enough for me. People like my son's wife would call it old-fashioned, even pitiful. But to me it was dignity, because nothing in that house had come without sacrifice, without a piece of myself being traded to build it. When my wife passed, I did not remarry, though I could have. I poured everything I had left into my son, determined that he would never feel a void in his life. I showed up for him, at every game, at every recital, at every moment when he needed a steady hand on his shoulder. I taught him how to drive, how to shake a man's hand, how to speak with respect, how to be true to his word. Even when my body grew older and my back stiffened from decades of labor, I carried myself with the same discipline I always had. I was never a man who raised his voice or sought to be the loudest in the room. My strength was quiet. My pride was in the work done well, in keeping my word, in being the kind of man others could rely on. That is what I believed manhood was meant to be. Now, in my late 60s, people glance at me and see nothing but the shell of an old man, a relic of another time. They see the wrinkles, the slowing step, the stubborn refusal to chase what is new and flashy, and they mistake it for weakness. My son himself, the boy I had once carried on my shoulders, looks at me now with pity, perhaps even embarrassment, because I do not fit into the world he is so desperate to impress. He dines at tables where wealth is flaunted and style is measured by what can be posted online. He has forgotten the value of sweat on the brow and calluses on the hands. He has forgotten that everything he grew up with, the meals, the holidays, the security, was carved out of the bones of a man who gave up everything for him. Yet I do not boast of these things. I never have. My dignity has always been in the silence, in doing what needed to be done without demanding applause. To many, I am invisible now, an afterthought. But invisibility has its strength too. A man like me learns to listen, to observe, to remain steady when others grow careless with their arrogance. They call me old-fashioned. Perhaps I am. But old-fashioned men are the ones who know the worth of loyalty, who understand the weight of betrayal, and who never forget the debt that others try so hard to ignore. My son has grown into a man who, at first glance, seems to have everything the world could offer. He wears tailored suits that fit like they were stitched onto his skin, drives cars that hum with quiet power, and speaks in a voice polished to impress boardrooms and dinner parties. He moves through life with the air of someone who has already won, as though every door should open for him simply because of who he has become. He is charming when it suits him, quick with a laugh, quicker with a toast, but I have lived long enough to see the truth beneath the polish. Beneath the tailored suit and confident smile is a hollowness he works tirelessly to cover. He chases prestige like a starving man chases food. Never satisfied, always hungry for the approval of people who do not know him and would never care for him in his weakest hour. He fills his days with the glitter of social standing, lavish dinners, curated friendships, a wife who values appearances more than substance, and he convinces himself that this is success. But I know better. I raised him. I see the arrogance in his stride, the subtle sneer when he looks at the modest life I still live. He calls me old-fashioned not as an observation, but as an insult, a way to distance himself from what he thinks is small, ordinary, even shameful. He forgets that the very foundation of his life was built upon what he now dismisses. The roof over his head when he was a boy, the shoes on his feet, the school books, the hot meals, the safety of a home where he never once went to bed cold or hungry. Those were not ordinary to me. They were earned with sweat, with sacrifice, with nights where I chose not to eat so he could. But he does not remember those things. Or perhaps he does, and chooses to ignore them, because remembering would force him to acknowledge that the life he flaunts today stands on the shoulders of a man he now looks down upon. He is shallow in ways he cannot see, for he measures worth only in what can be displayed, never in what can be endured. He believes wealth makes him powerful, and yet I know it only makes him dependent on the approval of others, on the constant validation of being seen as successful. His arrogance blinds him to what true strength looks like. I see it every time his eyes flicker, when he is forced to stand in silence, every time he avoids confrontation that might crack the perfect image he guards so fiercely. He believes himself to be above me now, his own father, because my clothes are simple, because I do not attend parties where names are exchanged like currency, because I prefer a quiet life that does not beg for applause. But pride like his is fragile. It shatters the moment reality intrudes, the moment applause fades, the moment the mask slips. And though he may think of me as outdated, ordinary, irrelevant, he does not yet understand that the man he dismisses so easily is the same man who has learned to endure storms without breaking. One day, when the glitter he worships begins to tarnish, he will see that prestige is paper thin, but dignity, the kind I have carried all my life, is made of steel. It was not through my son's lips that I discovered the truth, but through the quiet whisper of a relative who thought I should know. The words were spoken casually, almost without weight, yet they fell on me like a hammer. My son was hosting a grand Thanksgiving dinner, one that promised to be the event of the season, with tables overflowing, glasses raised in laughter, and every seat filled. The invitations had gone out far and wide, cousins I had not seen in years, distant relatives who never came around except when food was free, family, friends from childhood, even acquaintances who barely knew his name but were valuable in the social circle he now worshipped. The list was endless, extravagant, inclusive of everyone except me, his own father. I listened in silence as the relative rattled off the names, speaking with excitement about the evening to come, oblivious to the knife being twisted deeper with each word. I had not been forgotten. No, that would have been almost merciful. I had been deliberately left out, erased. My existence deemed inconvenient for the perfect image my son was determined to display. The man who had raised him, sacrificed for him, taught him how to carve the very turkey he would soon serve, was the only one deemed unworthy of a seat at his table. The irony cut deeper than words could ever express. I remembered years past, when Thanksgiving was simpler but filled with warmth. My late wife and I would set the table together, her laughter rising above the clatter of dishes as she reminded me not to sneak bites before the meal. My son would sit beside me, young and eager, watching as I carved the turkey, his eyes wide with pride. Back then, I was the center of his world, the anchor that kept our family steady. And now, years later, I was cast aside like a relic he no longer wanted anyone to see. The sting of exclusion burned in ways I could not easily hide. It was not merely the absence of an invitation that hurt, but the message it carried, that I was no longer considered family in the eyes of my own blood. My son had chosen appearances over loyalty, spectacle over love, and in doing so, he had revealed the truth I had long feared. I was not forgotten, I was unwanted. The thought settled heavily in my chest, but alongside the sorrow came something sharper, colder. Betrayal has a way of stirring not just grief but resolve. He believed he could erase me with the flick of a pen on a guest list. He believed he could build his empire of glass and gold without acknowledging the foundation beneath it. He believed I was irrelevant. But he was wrong. He would learn soon enough that a man may be excluded from a table, but he cannot be erased from the truth that feeds it. I remember every sacrifice, as if it were branded into my very bones, the years of bending my back so that my son could stand taller. When he was young, I told myself that I would give him every chance I never had, that his life would be paved with opportunities, even if it meant mine was paved with hardship. I worked late shifts long after my body begged for rest, the clatter of machines in the factory ringing in my ears as I forced myself to stay upright. I traded sleep for wages, trading my health for his future. Each overtime hour, a silent prayer that he would one day look back and understand. I can still see the nights when I would return home, my clothes soaked with sweat, my hands blistered and raw. My wife would wait for me with a small plate of food kept warm, her tired eyes full of encouragement, though she too carried the burden of sacrifice. We both knew what we were doing, giving up the best years of our lives so our son would never feel the weight of hunger or the sharp edge of want. When the bills came, and they always came heavier than we could bear, I sold the little treasures we had inherited from my parents. An old pocket watch that had belonged to my father, its tick, once a comforting sound in my childhood, found its way to a pawn shop counter. My mother's wedding ring, a simple band of gold worn thin with years of love, was exchanged for just enough to cover another semester of tuition. Each piece of history we gave away was a piece of ourselves, torn from our hearts but surrendered willingly for the dream of our boy's success. He never knew how often we went without so he could have more. He never knew that his neatly pressed school uniforms sometimes came at the cost of our own meals. He never knew that every book, every field trip, every extra expense was covered not by ease, but by sacrifice. I remember standing in the rain once, waiting for a second job interview at a warehouse, my suit already worn thin but pressed as best as I could manage. I was older than most of the men waiting with me, but I swallowed my pride because pride would not pay for my son's education. I told myself that someday, when he stood in his cap and gown, when he walked across that stage with a diploma in hand, every blister, every hunger pang, every sacrifice would be worth it. And it was, at least in that moment. I sat there in the audience, tears in my eyes, watching him take the diploma I had bought with my blood. I thought it was the beginning of a future we could share, a bond made stronger by the sacrifices that built it. But now, as I sit here, excluded from his Thanksgiving, I realize those sacrifices mean nothing to him. He sees only the old man in a modest suit, not the years of labor that built the foundation beneath his success. The memories cut deep, not because I regret what I gave, but because he has forgotten. And perhaps forgetting is worse than never knowing at all. The irony of it all almost makes me laugh, though the sound would taste bitter in my mouth. My son, so proud of his own success, so determined to prove he has outgrown the old man who raised him, has chosen for his grand Thanksgiving celebration the very restaurant I own. He believes it belongs to others, that it is run by some faceless group of wealthy investors who share his appetite for prestige. But what he does not know, what he has never even thought to ask, is that I am the silent partner behind its gleaming walls, the man whose quiet investment helped it rise from a dream into the most sought-after dining establishment in the city. I remember the day I signed those papers, the way the ink bled across the page as I committed a small fortune to the venture. My wife was still alive then, and she encouraged me with her gentle wisdom. "You've given everything away for others," she told me softly, her hand on mine. "This time, do something that will give back to you." It was not for pride, nor for vanity, but for stability. I had grown weary of seeing my hard work vanish into the bottomless pit of expenses. I wanted something that would endure, something to leave behind that was not just memories of sacrifice. So when an old friend approached me with the idea of the restaurant, I did not hesitate. Together we nurtured it into what it is now, an upscale sanctuary for the city's elite. A place where chandeliers glisten above polished marble floors, where waiters in black vests glide silently between tables carrying silver trays, and where reservations must be made months in advance. My son has no idea that the crisp white tablecloths and vintage wines he so admires are underwritten by his own father's quiet diligence. He thinks he chose the venue to flaunt his status, to impress extended family, friends, and acquaintances with his taste for luxury. He will sit at a long table, adorned with golden candles and floral centerpieces, basking in the admiration of others, never suspecting that every bite of the carefully prepared feast is mine to give or to take away. And I will be there not as a guest in his carefully curated circle, but as the owner in the shadows, watching, waiting. The thought of it steadies me, reminding me that while he may have excluded me from his list, he cannot erase me from the foundation of his world. The walls of that restaurant are mine. The floor beneath his feet is mine. The very feast he serves in arrogance exists because of me. He believes he holds the stage, but I own the theater. And when the moment comes, he will learn the truth not in anger, not in raised voices, but in the quiet, devastating way a man delivers justice. My revenge will not be loud. It will be undeniable. Thanksgiving night arrives, and while others are busy with noise and celebration, I prepare myself with the same quiet dignity I have always carried. I do not dress to impress or to compete with the shallow glitter of the evening. I slip into my familiar dark suit, well-tailored but modest, the one I have worn to weddings, funerals, and moments where respect mattered more than fashion. A crisp white shirt lies beneath, no tie, just as I prefer, for I have never been one to hide behind appearances. My polished black shoes gleam faintly in the lamplight as I lace them with steady hands. In the mirror, my thinning silver hair is combed neatly. My weathered face stares back with lines carved deep by sacrifice and years, and my eyes hold something different tonight. Not grief, not longing, but resolve. Outside, the city is alive with the buzz of the holiday, streets glimmering with festive lights, but I walk through it as if moving in another world. The restaurant rises ahead, its grand glass doors glowing warmly against the cold night air, welcoming guests with the kind of opulence my son craves. Inside, laughter already spills across the marble floor. Golden chandeliers shimmer overhead, and the scent of roasted turkey, fine wines, and delicately spiced sides lingers in the air like temptation. Families gather, dressed in their best. Waiters glide between tables carrying silver trays, and a string quartet plays softly in the corner. My son is there, at the head of a long table draped in white linens and adorned with golden candles, surrounded by relatives, friends, even acquaintances he values more than his own father. He laughs, gesturing proudly, basking in the glow of admiration, unaware of the storm walking through the doors. I push the glass open, and the sound of it closing behind me rings louder in my ears than the music. My footsteps echo against the polished marble floor, softer than the clink of glasses, but somehow they seem to carry weight. Some turn to glance at me, not recognizing who I am in this sea of opulence, but they look away quickly, caught up in their own cheer. To them, I am just another older man passing through. But to my son, when his eyes finally lift and lock onto mine across the crowded room, the color drains from his face. He had not expected me here. He had carefully built this world without me, convinced I was too small, too ordinary, too easy to erase. Yet here I am, walking toward him, silent and steady, not as an uninvited guest, but as the unseen master of the house he believes is his stage. The air shifts as I enter, though no one else feels it yet. I am not here to cause a scene. I am here to reclaim something far greater than a seat at his table. Tonight, I arrive not just as a father denied, but as the man who owns the very ground beneath his arrogance. The moment my son's eyes fall on me, his smile falters, his polished mask slipping for just a second before he forces it back into place. He tries to laugh louder, to wave his hand with exaggerated ease, but the stiffness in his posture betrays him. He leans toward his wife, lips curling into a sneer, and I see the words spill out like venom, though I cannot hear them over the soft strings of the quartet. His wife follows his gaze toward me, her perfectly shaped brows furrowing as though I am an embarrassment she must endure. Then they both exchange a glance of mutual disdain, and my son's lips tighten with the mockery of someone who believes himself untouchable. His friends, seated nearby, are quick to mirror his reaction, smirking as he leans closer to whisper to them, his hand raised just enough to cover his mouth, as though I might somehow hear his insults across the room. Their laughter follows almost immediately, short and sharp, with the kind of cruelty reserved for those who mistake kindness for weakness. I do not need to hear the exact words to know their meaning. He is mocking me, mocking the audacity of a father who dares to step into a place where he was not welcomed, mocking the sight of me in my simple, understated suit among his carefully curated circle of prestige. He sits straighter, puffing his chest as though to reassert control, as though to remind everyone that he is the host, the orchestrator of this grand evening, and I am nothing more than an unwanted shadow slipping in where I do not belong. His voice rises just enough to carry over the clatter of cutlery, words sharp as knives, and though his laughter tries to coat them in sugar, the bitterness leaks through. I see his friends glance at me, their eyes narrowing, some shaking their heads with derision before turning back to him with amused grins, feeding his arrogance. It is a performance, and he is the actor playing to his crowd, certain that the stage belongs entirely to him. He does not know, cannot even fathom, that the very table at which he sits, the very chandeliers that sparkle above his head, the very walls that echo with his shallow laughter, are all mine. I built this place not with arrogance, but with vision, patience, and quiet strength, and while he sneers at my presence, believing it an intrusion, I stand with the unspoken truth that he is the guest here, not I. Still, I do not falter. I meet his mockery with silence, my gaze steady, my steps unhurried. If he expects shame, he will find none. If he expects me to retreat, he will wait forever. And in the tightening of his jaw, the nervous twitch at the corner of his smirk, I see it the first fracture in his arrogance, the first shadow of fear that whispers he may not be as in control as he believes. I walk past the gleaming tables and gilded laughter without a word, my shoes making a steady rhythm against the polished floor, not rushed, not hesitant, simply deliberate. My son's eyes follow me, sharp and burning with indignation, waiting for me to make a scene, waiting for me to storm over to his table, to demand an explanation or cry out my wounded heart. But I give him none of that. Instead, I ease myself onto a stool at the bar, my movements calm, my posture upright, my expression unreadable. The bartender greets me with a polite nod, not knowing who I truly am, and I return it with the faintest smile, lifting a hand to order nothing more than a simple glass of water. The cold tumbler is set before me, condensation sliding down its sides, and I wrap my fingers around it as though it were an anchor. Around me, the hum of the restaurant carries on unbroken. Forks scrape against porcelain, glasses clink in toasts, and laughter bursts like champagne corks from table to table. My son throws his head back with exaggerated joy, his voice booming louder than most, his gestures sweeping as though determined to drown me in the noise of his new world. Yet I sit quietly, watching not with bitterness, not with desperation, but with a dignity that cannot be touched by his arrogance. My silence is not weakness. It is strength honed over years of sacrifice, patience, and restraint. I do not need to raise my voice to be heard, not tonight. Every quiet second I remain becomes its own statement, a silent defiance that unsettles more than any outburst ever could. The bar's polished mirror reflects the scene behind me, and in it I see everything without turning. My son's smug grin faltering every so often, his wife's whisper into his ear, the sideways glances from friends, curious as to why the man at the bar holds himself with such steady calm. They wonder why I am not crumbling, why I am not storming out into the night with my pride in tatters. They cannot understand that I have nothing to prove to them, nothing to prove to him. My presence alone is proof enough. I sip the water slowly, letting the coolness wash over the dryness in my throat, and breathe evenly, like a man who has learned to master storms without raising his voice against the thunder. And though I appear to them as silent and small, I know the truth. The walls around them, the roof above their heads, the very stage of their mockery exists because of me. They do not yet know that the silence they dismiss is the calm before a reckoning they could never anticipate. My son leans back in his chair, his arm draped carelessly over the backrest, as if he were the king of this glittering banquet hall, his voice carrying over the hum of conversations like a trumpet call demanding attention. He raises his glass of wine high, the ruby liquid catching the warm golden lights, and begins to boast in a tone thick with pride. To family, to friends, and to the blessings of success, he declares, his eyes scanning the room, ensuring every gaze rests on him. His words grow louder, heavier, dripping with self-importance. He paints himself as the sole architect of this evening, speaking of the expense of the feast, the meticulous planning, the generosity of covering the bill for every guest present. He waves his hand toward the platters of roasted turkey, the trays of glazed ham, the delicate arrangements of cranberry and pumpkin pies, as if these were monuments erected in his honor. Guests nod approvingly, some clap, others laugh obligingly, feeding his hunger for validation. I sit still at the bar, my glass of water untouched now, my gaze steady, fixed on the reflection in the mirror that captures him in his theater of arrogance. Each boast strikes me not as a revelation, but as a wound reopened, a reminder of how far he has drifted from humility, from gratitude, from the roots I planted with sweat and sacrifice. He speaks of paying, but I know the truth that his supposed generosity is nothing more than vanity dressed up as kindness, that his wealth is built on the foundation of sacrifices he has long forgotten, or worse, chosen to erase. I watch as he gestures broadly, laughing at his own wit, his wife's hand resting proudly on his arm, the guests leaning in as though basking in the glow of his magnanimity. But beneath the surface I see something else, a flicker of insecurity in his eyes each time they dart toward me, as if he cannot bear my quiet presence, as if my silence is louder than his boasting. For every word he utters, I hear the echo of nights I worked late shifts, of mornings I went without so he could have more, of heirlooms sold to cover tuition bills, of dignity swallowed to ensure his future. And now here he is, parading wealth that glitters only on the surface, unaware that the stage on which he performs is mine, that the walls holding his pride together are mine, that his feast is nothing but borrowed glory. I do not flinch, I do not rise, I do not call him out, not yet. I let him swell with his own vanity, let him climb higher on the pedestal he builds for himself, for I know the higher he climbs, the farther he will fall when truth comes crashing down. My son leans toward his circle, his lips curling into the kind of smirk I once saw only in boys who mocked others to mask their own weakness. He tilts his head in my direction, not subtle, not discreet, just enough for his words to carry to those seated closest, though not quite to me. "Look at him," he whispers with a mocking chuckle, "still clinging to that same old suit. Man can't even afford to keep up appearances, but he shows up here, acting like he belongs." His friends laugh, shallow and sharp, the kind of laughter that wounds more than it amuses. His wife covers her mouth delicately, eyes glittering with the same condescension, while another guest chimes in, "At least he gets a free meal out of it." The laughter swells, hushed but cruel, their voices weaving together into a chorus of disrespect. He leans closer, lowering his tone but not enough to hide the venom. "Irrelevant," he says, with a finality that stings more than any shout could. The world's moved on without him. He's just a shadow now. Their laughter bubbles again, louder this time, though carefully disguised as polite chuckles to blend with the larger room's merriment. I sit at the bar, my back to them, my reflection staring back at me in the mirror behind the rows of gleaming bottles. I hear every word. Each syllable is a dagger, but I do not wince. My hand rests calmly on my glass, my face steady, betraying none of the storm building beneath. For a moment, my mind drifts back to when this same boy, not yet hardened by pride, once tugged on my sleeve asking for help with homework, when his laughter was innocent, when his joy was my joy. Now that same laughter is twisted, aimed like a blade at me, feeding the vanity of his companions. My chest tightens, with a mix of sorrow and anger, but I force it down into the depths where resolve begins to form. Let them laugh. Let them think me broken, irrelevant, a relic of another age. They do not know the truth, that the very walls around them, the fine food on their plates, the illusion of his grandeur all rests on foundations I laid in silence. Their ridicule may burn, but the fire it lights within me is steady, controlled, unshakable. I take a slow sip of water, eyes still fixed on my reflection, letting their laughter wash over me like waves against stone, knowing the tide is about to turn. The din of clinking glasses and silverware continues around me, laughter spilling across the tables like cheap wine, but then the tone shifts. From the corner of my eye, I see the restaurant manager, a man in his 40s with the crisp posture of someone trained to respect hierarchy, making his way toward me. His steps are careful, deferential, the opposite of the smirks and whispers I've just endured. He pauses at the bar, leans slightly forward, and his voice carries the warmth of recognition that only those who truly know the balance of power would dare use in a room full of pretenders. "Good evening, sir," he says softly, but not so softly that others nearby fail to hear. "The chef has prepared something special tonight. Would you like me to have it sent to your table, or will you be dining here at the bar?" The word "sir" rings differently than any insult just thrown my way. It carries weight, respect, authority. I meet his eyes in the mirror, then slowly turn to face him. My nod is small, deliberate, but it carries command. "At the bar is fine," I reply, my voice calm, steady, the tone of a man who has no need to prove himself. Behind me, I feel the ripple it creates. My son's laughter falters mid-sentence. He glances toward me, confusion flickering across his face. His head tilts slightly, as if replaying what he just heard, trying to reconcile the image of the man he mocked with the deference now unfolding before him. I don't move, don't look at him. Instead, I rest my hand on the bar, feeling the polished wood under my fingertips, the weight of patience steadying me. The manager gives a slight bow of respect before turning briskly toward the kitchen. Around the room, small pockets of curiosity awaken guests turning their heads, whispers shifting tone, eyes darting between me and my son. He leans toward his wife, his whisper urgent this time, not mocking. "Why is he calling him sir?" he mutters, though I don't need to hear the words to feel the unease in his posture. The air thickens with tension. His arrogance collides with a truth he does not yet understand, a truth I've kept close to my chest for years, waiting for the right moment. My lips curl into the faintest of smiles, a shadow of expression only the mirror before me catches. Tonight, the feast of pride he so carefully prepared will be served back to him cold, undeniable, and seasoned with truth. The evening hum of the restaurant begins to soften as plates are cleared and glasses emptied, the clatter of silverware replaced by the mellow hum of satisfied conversation. Candles flicker lower, their light glinting against wine glasses half filled, while guests lean back in their chairs, content from the lavish spread. My son sits at the center of it all, his posture inflated with self-importance, his arm casually draped around the back of his wife's chair. He laughs loudly, still basking in the imagined glow of his supposed generosity, still convinced that tonight is his performance, his stage. But then the air shifts. The manager steps forward, his black suit pressed sharp under the lights, his voice carrying easily across the room. The chatter quiets naturally, curiosity pulling heads toward him. He clears his throat gently, then smiles in the way only a man with purpose does when he knows his words will land like stone in still water. "Ladies and gentlemen," he begins, "before we conclude this wonderful Thanksgiving evening, I'd like to take a moment to offer our deepest gratitude to the true host of tonight, not just of this gathering, but of this very establishment." A murmur ripples across the room. My son straightens suddenly, his glass of wine halting midway to his lips, his smug grin frozen in place. He glances around as if preparing to rise, assuming the words must belong to him, as if the universe itself must bend to his ego. But the manager does not look at him. Instead, he gestures subtly, respectfully, toward me at the bar. This evening, and many before it, would not be possible without the generosity and vision of our silent partner, the man who ensured this restaurant could thrive, and who graciously allowed this celebration to take place here tonight. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice strengthens, "please join me in thanking Mr. Father's name, the true owner of this restaurant." The room stills. Every whisper, every clink, every smirk dies instantly. Dozens of eyes turn to me, the old man seated quietly at the bar, dressed not for ostentation but for dignity. My son's jaw tightens, his hand slipping from his glass. His wife leans forward, disbelief etched sharp across her face. The applause begins slowly, hesitant at first, then swelling as realization spreads through the room. Some rise slightly from their chairs to glance toward me, their expressions shifting from confusion to respect. I don't move quickly. I don't need to. I turn from the bar, my expression calm, the faint trace of a knowing smile on my lips. For the first time that night, my son looks small in the room he thought he owned. My son's laughter dies on his lips as though someone had stolen the air from his lungs. His face drains of color, the flush of pride replaced by the stark pallor of disbelief. He glances wildly from the manager to me, his eyes wide, his lips parting as if to form words that never come. The wine glass trembles in his hand, the liquid inside quivering like his composure. Murmurs rise across the long tables, whispers weaving together into a wave of realization that sweeps through the room. Guests exchange startled glances, their gazes darting between the man at the bar and the one who had spent the night boasting of his supposed largesse. The laughter that once followed his every arrogant quip has vanished, replaced with silence sharpened by judgment. The son who mocked his father as broke and irrelevant now sits under the harsh light of truth, exposed before the very people he sought to impress. His wife leans in, her perfectly painted smile faltering, whispering something meant to steady him, but even she cannot mask the shame clouding her eyes. Friends who once roared with him now avert their gaze, unwilling to share in his collapse. The weight of humiliation settles visibly upon his shoulders, pressing him into his chair, his chest no longer puffed with pride, but sunken with despair. For all his arrogance, for all his efforts to bury me under insults and silence, the truth has risen higher and brighter than his lies. He is no longer the host, no longer the man in control. He is just a boy, again, stripped of his facade, watched by every eye in the room, powerless against the truth that his father is the very reason the night exists. I rise slowly from my seat at the bar, the motion deliberate, unhurried, every eye in the room following me, as though the weight of silence itself had turned me into the center of gravity. My polished shoes sound against the floor with a quiet authority that needs no fanfare. I smooth the lapel of my understated suit, not as an act of vanity but of composure, and when I stand fully, I let my gaze sweep over the room. The murmurs die away completely. I can see the anticipation in their eyes, the curiosity, the shame. My son sits slouched at the head of the table he claimed as his own, his once boastful grin wiped away, his fork idle in his hand. His friends and colleagues shift uncomfortably, torn between embarrassment and intrigue, while my daughter-in-law's painted smile is frozen stiff, unable to hold its shape under the truth. I draw in a steady breath, and when I speak, my voice is calm, measured, not loud yet, carrying into every corner of the restaurant with a clarity of conviction. Family, I say, should never forget the table where they first learned to eat. The words hang heavy in the air, simple yet piercing, and I let them settle before continuing. It is easy to wear wealth like a crown. It is easy to forget the hands that sacrificed so that bread could be on your plate, so that lights stayed on at night, so that education was paid for without question. It is easy to forget, because forgetting is convenient. But truth has a way of reminding us when we least expect it. I rest my hand lightly on the back of the nearest chair, my eyes steady, not on my son but on the room itself, so that every soul gathered feels the weight of what I am saying. This restaurant, this dinner, this gathering, it was not built on arrogance nor on vanity. It was built on sacrifice, on patience, on the humility of hard work. And let it be known tonight that what is mocked as ordinary often stands as extraordinary when the masks fall away. My voice softens, but the steel beneath it never wavers. A son may forget his father's table. He may choose pride over gratitude, but the table will always remember. The sacrifices will always speak, and the truth will always rise. The silence that follows is absolute. I lower my hand, straighten once more, and without raising my voice or demanding applause, I let the dignity of my presence finish the speech for me. The guests, one by one, dropped their eyes, some nodding faintly in respect, others fidgeting as shame tugs at their conscience. My son cannot meet my gaze. He stares at his untouched plate, his empire of pride crumbling beneath the quiet truth of a father who has nothing left to prove. The silence after my words is so deep it seems to press against the walls, a silence that weighs heavier than thunder. Glasses that were mid-air are quietly set down, forks rest uneaten against fine china, and no one dares to shift too loudly in their chair. Eyes dart around the table, but many avoid meeting mine. Some of the guests, cousins, old friends, distant relatives, bow their heads ever so slightly, their earlier laughter curdling into shame. A few cannot even bring themselves to look at me, their discomfort written in the way their shoulders tighten and their hands fidget nervously in their laps. They know they were complicit in the mockery, and now the truth has stripped away their excuses. Others glance toward my son, their expressions caught between pity and disdain. His bravado has drained from him. The man who once filled the room with noise now sitting small, his arrogance exposed under the sterile lights. His wife shifts uneasily at his side, her painted nails tapping the table in a restless rhythm, searching for a defense that does not exist. There is no applause, no cheer, no dramatic uproar, only the quiet acknowledgement that the mask has fallen. And what lies beneath is undeniable. Some guests steal glances at me again, but this time not with derision or dismissal. There is respect in their eyes, hesitant, yet sincere, as if they are only now beginning to understand the quiet strength I have carried all along. The entire room seems to hold its breath, suspended in the raw stillness of revelation, waiting to see what will come next. My son's chair scrapes awkwardly against the polished floor as he rises halfway, then sits back down, as though even his legs cannot decide whether to stand or flee. His face is flushed crimson, beads of sweat forming at his temple despite the coolness of the room. He clears his throat once, then again, each sound loud in the hushed silence, and finally manages to force words past lips that only minutes ago were full of smug laughter. "Dad, I didn't mean it like that," he stammers, his voice thin and quivering. "You know how I joke sometimes. I was just trying to lighten the mood. Everyone knows I didn't mean any disrespect." The words are clumsy, hollow, stretched too thin to cover the humiliation radiating off him. He glances at the guests as if searching for nods of agreement, for allies to bail him out of the pit he has dug, but none come. The room remains frozen, eyes fixed, waiting, their silence louder than condemnation. His wife tugs at his sleeve, whispering something sharp under her breath, but the look on her face betrays her own embarrassment. He swallows hard and tries again, forcing a weak smile that crumbles instantly. "I should have invited you. I realize that now. I'm sorry, Dad. Really. I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings." The apology is so thin, it collapses under its own weight. It isn't contrition, it's desperation, the frantic patchwork of a man who has been exposed, who wants nothing more than to shove the truth back into the shadows. But the truth hangs heavy in the air, undeniable. His words only deepen the chasm he created, for everyone in the room can see them for what they are. Not the heartfelt words of a son, but the shallow mutterings of a man scrambling to salvage pride already lost. The clinking of silverware and the uneasy shifting of chairs fade as I push back my stool at the bar and rise to my feet. I smooth the front of my modest charcoal suit, the same one I wear for church and funerals, and the weight of the room seems to follow me as I cross the polished floor. I don't look toward my son. His presence, his shame, his shallow apology are no longer mine to carry. Instead, I turn to the staff who stand respectfully near the kitchen doors, their eyes lowered, yet full of quiet admiration. "Thank you," I say softly, each word measured, genuine. "You've served everyone with grace tonight." The manager bows his head slightly, the chef nods from behind the swinging doors, and the waiters give small smiles as if they too understand the dignity of silence. I place a hand on the bar for a moment, steadying myself, then walk toward the entrance. The heavy wooden doors open, and the crisp night air rushes in, cool against my skin, clean and freeing. I step outside, the murmur of voices swelling behind me before the doors swing shut. The city street glows under rows of dim lamps, the chill carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves and rain on concrete. I pause at the curb, drawing a long breath, my head lifted, my shoulders square. The echo of laughter and betrayal remains trapped inside those walls, but I no longer carry it with me. My silence speaks louder than any rebuke I could have delivered. Tonight, I walk away not as a man cast aside, but as one who knows his worth, leaving arrogance and shallow pride to wither in the shadows behind me. As I walk beneath the streetlights, their pale glow stretching across the quiet pavement, I find myself unburdened in a way I haven't felt in years. The November chill nips at my skin, but inside there is only calm, the kind of stillness that comes when a storm has finally passed. I think back on the years of sacrifice, the long shifts, the sleepless nights, the meals skipped so my son could eat better, study harder, dream bigger. None of it was ever about money, though the world seems blind without its shimmer. It was about building something lasting, about teaching values that I once believed could never be broken. Tonight, as my son sat surrounded by wealth, posturing and preening, he revealed what he thought mattered most. Yet the truth is clearer now than it ever was. True wealth is not measured in the chandeliers of a restaurant or the grand words of a toast. It is found in the grit of a man who gives everything for his family, in the quiet pride of a husband who loved his wife fully, in the resilience of a father who bears humiliation with grace. I have walked through betrayal, through silence, through a dinner where laughter was a blade turned against me, and still I stand unbowed. My dignity remains intact, my sacrifices carved into the years of my face like scripture etched in stone. Justice came not in fire or rage, but in the cold unveiling of truth, simple and undeniable. The son who cast me aside, who believed I was irrelevant, now knows the foundation beneath his feet was mine to lay. That is enough. With every step into the dark night, I carry no bitterness, only the knowledge that I have lived with honor. Let others chase status. Let them hunger for applause. I have something richer, something no one can strip away, the quiet power of a man whose life speaks for itself. Your time means a lot. Thank you for listening to my journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, just click the box on the left.